I was in a meeting a couple years ago, someplace that's not this congregation. From many faith traditions, we're discussing theology, kind of talking about our various traditions, interpretations of some question or another. A newer member of the group was present and was really contributing, truly adding to the conversation. But after a few comments from the new person, a longtime member of that group turned to the rest of us and said, "Who is this person?" As if to ask, do they have the right to speak in this space? I watched as the new member seemed to shrink before our eyes. They stopped their contributions in that meeting and they never came back. Never have I seen a clearer example of a soul being stepped on. Now that's no way to start a sermon. So let me quickly add that thankfully I've seen the opposite much more often. When we're welcomed into a group with open arms and encouraged to contribute, we feel more free to express what's in our hearts. Our souls can make an appearance. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. We all need places, relationships in which the conditions are right for our souls to emerge. But first, it seems important to ask, because the word is loaded maybe for some of us, what is a soul? Some think it's a divine being, something that a divine being injects us with at some point when we're conceived or when we're born, and there's a whole debate about that, of course. In 1907, trusting in that definition of the soul and assuming that the human soul must have mass, Dr. Duncan McDougall of Massachusetts conducted a study in which he weighed 6 medical patients nearing the end of their lives. He claimed to have discovered that the human soul really does leave the body at death and that it weighs about 3/4 of an ounce. He ran the same study on a control group of dogs and said that for them there was no change in weight, proving that dogs have no souls, and that's how I know his study was a bunch of baloney. Yeah, it's good to be with other dog lovers this morning. I don't put a lot of stock in that injection from God definition of the human soul. Too often it leads to the soul being defined as something that will either be saved or damned someday. But there's this other definition. The human soul is what a person is at the core of their being. When all the masks are dropped, when we're not sibling or spouse or parent, we're not neighbor or friend, we're not pretending we're more okay or stronger than we are to avoid emotion. The soul is what is behind those masks. One of my favorite authors, Parker Palmer, has an analogy that helps me think about exactly what the soul needs before it can emerge from behind its various masks. He says, the human soul doesn't want to be fixed. It simply wants to be seen and heard. The soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, and shy. When we go crashing through the woods, shouting for it to come out so we can help it, the soul will stay in hiding. But if we're willing to sit quietly and wait for a while, the soul may show itself. The soul, he concludes, speaks its truth only under quiet, inviting, and trustworthy conditions. So, the soul is the essence of us, the truest and most integrated part of ourselves, a part of us that is often shy and has to be invited to show itself. Parker Palmer's illustration struck a chord with me. Growing up in Indiana, I loved the rolling, leafy woods behind my grandparents' house. My brothers and I could spend hours tromping around, plotting against our babysitter, sitting, pretending in the shadows there. One year I got a squirrel call for my birthday. My family hunted some, though the animals were usually pretty safe with us. But a few times, no hunting involved, I took my squirrel call out to the woods to see if I could strike up a conversation. This is what you do when you don't have a TV, you see. I learned that if you just bang and bang and bang on that call, the other squirrels will think a psycho has moved to the neighborhood. They will yell back at you as if to say, what the heck is wrong with you? But no way will they poke their heads out. But if I would just sit and every once in a while kind of tap that call just a little bit, some brave little soul would eventually poke her head around the tree to take a look. Parker Palmer is right to make this animal comparison with the soul. Shy, elusive, needing just the right conditions to make itself known. Now, you might think that ministers are people who are naturally good at creating those conditions. If only you were right about that. Early on in my ministry, my hospital visits were basically just banging away on a squirrel call. Hey, how you doing? How you feeling? What are the doctors telling you? Quick prayer and away we go. I was nervous, and I'm sure I made them nervous too. I imagine some of them asked for a chaplain to help them recover from my ministry to them. But then I spent a year as a resident chaplain in a big hospital system in Indianapolis. I've talked about that before. And my supervisor, God bless her, helped me to see that there was an arc to artful conversations with folks who were sometimes very ill, even dying. It usually started with small talk, almost every time. And being a panting puppy-level extrovert back then, that part was natural for me. But as I learned to calm that part of me that wanted just to chatter, was really afraid of what might happen if there was quiet, I was better able to just be present in a helpful way. Maybe ask a helpful question here and there, and lo and behold, folks started to go deeper in their conversations with me, to talk about their hopes and fears, their loves, and the big, broad arcs of their stories, especially in the hospice unit as they prepared to die. That kind of ministry isn't about fixing. It's about creating the right atmosphere for folks to take their guard down a little, to drop their protective masks long enough to be seen and heard for who they really are. We all wear masks as we move about the world, and we must. It's not wise to go through life baring our souls to every person we meet. There's a personality disorder of which that is an apt description. So, most of us are constantly, if unconsciously, asking, how much of my soul can I reveal here? Negotiating, experimenting, retreating, and advancing, deciding whether it might be safe to reveal this or that. How much of my soul can I reveal and still be a part of this relationship, a part of this group? That dance is just a part of being human. But if we aren't careful, if there's no place for us to really develop and reveal our souls, they might go into hiding. And a soul in hiding can become destructive. The developer of family systems theory, Murray Bowen, had as central tenets of his theory what he called solid self and pseudo-self. When we're operating out of solid self, he said, our actions are, quote, based on clearly defined beliefs, opinions, convictions, and life principles. But when we're operating out of pseudo-self, he said, we're acting on a group of principles, beliefs, philosophies, and knowledge often acquired as group pressure dictates. Therefore, these beliefs, he says, are often inconsistent and random, but the individual is not aware of the inconsistencies. Thus, the persons can pretend to be in harmony with many and varied groups. So imagine this in a two-person love relationship. One partner is claiming a lot of space. The other is trading solid self for acceptance. I don't really agree, but I'll go along to keep the other person happy. One theorist reminds us, the give and take of self is generally accomplished by bargaining. The healthier the relationship, the more bargaining. When the relationship becomes fixed, with one partner gaining self and the other losing self in a rigid manner, dysfunction results. Too many relationships like that. Too many memberships in groups which force us to hide our souls. And we lose touch with the deepest part of ourselves. Instead of becoming clear indications of what we should pursue next, our soul's yearnings can become destructive impulses, addictions, bad feelings in the pit of our stomach that we can't get rid of and can't attach to anything exactly. To be healthy, we require safe soul spaces. Now, I have to say I'm not that high on the term safe spaces. But that's because I've seen that language misused to silence disagreement. If you don't think the way I think, then this isn't a safe space for me to say what I think. Democracy and congregational life require more of us than that kind of wilting flower approach to life. But having a place in which we can safely reveal what's largely our true self is a basic human need. We need spaces and relationships in which it's okay for our souls to come out of hiding. The conditions for that are easy to name, though often they're not so easy to create. The soul needs kindness paired with honesty. It needs compassion. It needs enough trust to allow times of quiet, faith that the soul will reemerge in the absence of words, that the calming presence of another person is often enough. There's also a pretty reliable description, or prescription rather, for sending a soul back into hiding. Lots of self-righteous oughts and shoulds and musts, condemnation for not being liberal or conservative enough, healthy enough, a good enough, or parent or child. These are like open fields to the soul, places with no cover in which it's dangerous to stay for too long. Problem is, that kind of shaming now takes place every day in public on social media. It is a tragically effective way to bolster fake self-esteem, to create groups in which scores of people march around with their righteous masks on, parading for one another, trying to demonstrate just how good or liberal or conservative or whatever they are, trying to pretend they aren't searching for answers like the rest of us. And all around the edges of those pseudo-self-esteem parades are souls watching and hiding, knowing that in this place I cannot risk revealing my soul. When institutions give in to that temptation, they lose the benefit of loyal dissent, the honest thinking of people who love the congregation or company or university but don't agree with some of its directions. When we do this in personal relationships, as Bowen said, dysfunction is always the result. Breakup, cutoff, separation, the disappearance of the soul. One could ask, why is it so important that the soul be allowed to come out of hiding, at least in degrees? Again, this from Parker Palmer. Our deepest calling is to grow into authentic selfhood, whether or not it conforms to some image of what we ought to be. As we do so, we'll not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service in the world. So not only do we need a safe soul space, the world truly needs us to have one, or many, to be a part of creating that kind of place for another person. This is why at this congregation, shameless plug, we have a program called Chalice Circles. They're not discussion groups, though those are important too. These are places in which we're invited to share deeply without interruption, be listened to by a circle of people who are intentionally around a shared covenant, creating a soul-friendly environment. Do you have a soul-friendly space? Are you making sure you spend time there? Parker Palmer is a successful author and consultant now, but he didn't start there. At one point in his life, he was a young professor who realized he wasn't at home in that environment. Though he felt like that's what he should be, he didn't feel like it's who he was at his core. At the same time, he was dealing with debilitating depression. Here's what he wrote about that time. Like a wild animal, the soul is tough, resilient, resourceful, savvy, and self-sufficient. It knows how to survive in hard places. I learned about these qualities during my bouts with depression. In that deadly darkness, the faculties I had always depended on collapsed. My intellect was useless. My emotions were dead. My will was impotent. My ego was shattered. But from time to time, deep in the thickets of my inner wilderness, I could sense the presence of something that knew how to stay alive, even when the rest of me wanted to die. That something was my tough and tenacious soul. Are you, friend, in touch with your tough and tenacious soul? Are you finding that silence in which you can hear it speaking to you over the din of constant words in our culture? May your shy, resilient soul have all that it needs to emerge when the time is right. Amen.